Welcome to the Jaco Report. I'm Charles Jaco. It's no news that much of the city of St. Louis right now is a hellscape of abandoned and collapsing buildings. You only usually see ruined neighborhoods like this in war zones, but parts of the city, mostly in North St. Louis, do look a lot like Aleppo or Fallujah after an artillery barrage. How did once vibrant neighborhoods get reduced to rubble? How do property owners get away with abandoning buildings and letting them rot? And how does a financially struggling city either tear down the derelict properties or rehab them so families could actually live there? We talk about it today with two people working on the problem. We're joined by Patrick Brown. Patrick is with Mayor Lyda Krewson's office. He is the mayor's senior policy advisor on vacancy and blight. Also with us is Sundy Whiteside. She is board president of SLACO. That is the St. Louis Association of Community Organizations. SLACO works on many issues, including the Vacancy Collaborative, working with the city to try to do something about the crisis of abandoned, dangerous buildings. Thanks very much to both of you for being here. I appreciate it. Let me ask a basic question that somebody who just arrived from Mars into St. Louis might ask. How does this happen? How does this even happen, where you get mile after mile, block after block of city neighborhoods that literally look like the Syrian army has shelled it and knocked it to pieces, and they're allowed to stand that way for years? How does this even come about?
I'll start if you don't mind.
Okay.
At the root of everything, it's a complex issue and it has problems that have surfaced.
Right.
But at the root of everything is the systemic racism that has divided our city throughout the years. It has caused us to look at one side of the corridor, which is the north side where I live, which is predominantly African American. Mm-hmm. It's highly segregated, and we're cut off to a lot of resources that people that live in other areas and other zip codes have the opportunity to take advantage of.
So when you say racism, for example, white flight just hollowed them out not only of middle-class people, but of capital, and there's nothing around to fix the buildings? You know, explain that a little more to somebody who might not be aware of it.
I say racism because as an African American living in a certain zip code, when I go in to apply for a loan to rehab or do something with my property, it's looked at differently. And when you look at some of the information that an organization called SLACO has produced on the banking opportunities towards residents that are north of Del Mar, you'll see that there are 0 home loans pretty much given to purchase homes, and very few refinancing and mortgage of your mortgage to rehab and stabilize your homes. So those opportunities and those funds are very limited. It's almost as if we are being strangulated right where we live.
Patrick, same question for you. I mean, you work for the administration. You know, how does something like this even happen? People come here from other cities, you know, look around and go, ye gods, how could something like this occur? And it's not like it happened in a week. This happened over decades. But how does this even happen?
Well, Sundy's absolutely correct. What I would say to your point about people coming to St. Louis and seeing this and being shocked, I actually disagree with that. I think most people don't see it. And that's
because they never go there.
Well, yeah, it's quite easy to live in St. Louis and the city in particular and have one type of experience your entire life. Never go across Del Mar, never have to be exposed to the types of issues that North St. Louis has dealt with for a very long time, and now parts of South St. Louis are dealing with as well. But really, the vacancy issue, it starts high and it kind of ends low. It starts at the federal level with housing policy, you know, historic redlining, making it very difficult for certain neighborhoods to get financing to purchase homes or rehab homes. Redlining was obviously, you know, overruled with the Supreme Court, but that's now kind of baked into the system. It's not as much, you know, kind of racist people making racist policies. It's kind of a inherently racist system.
It's the way the policy is.
Right, right.
So what do you do about this? I mean, there are two ways to handle properties like that. One, in the best of all possible worlds, is to rehab them and maybe have somebody buy them, or somebody buy them to rehab them so they become functional buildings again. And then the other, if they've gotten ruined so much, is to tear them down. But the last figure I saw, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is within the city of St. Louis there are 3,500 abandoned properties, something like that?
So we use the kind of loose number of 25,000 vacant
25,000.
parcels, properties in the city. Now that's separated out by privately held and publicly owned within the LRA.
And the LRA is?
The Land Reutilization Authority.
And that's the city agency
City's
that does?
land bank. The city's land bank that takes vacant properties that go through tax sale and foreclosure, but they're not redeemed by anyone at the tax sale. So LRA is the owner of last resort for abandoned properties.
So what do you do with 25,000 abandoned properties? I mean, this affects the safety of people in the neighborhood, because gangbangers and dope slingers, or the homeless will end up camping there, to the buildings physically falling down and endangering residents in the neighborhoods, to just creating overall blight. I mean, what programs are going on in the city right now to try to do something about a problem this absolutely massive? Sundy?
Well, SLACO has taken great strides to try to mobilize its members, which are neighborhood residents, to try to do something about the problem. And we've initiated several programs that the city has supported us on, such as the Finest 15 program, where we host a workshop for residents to go in and learn how to purchase LRA properties, and then we assist them with some of the financial assistance. If they are in need of credit repair, we send them to the right organizations to work with them, and the other financial
So the
institutions
people in
to
these
help.
neighborhoods who actually already live in these neighborhoods, but maybe are renting, might be able to afford to actually buy
Correct.
one of these properties.
And
fix
that's
them up.
one of our goals, is to have existing residents who are paying rent to try to purchase one of the LRA homes to rehab them. And we have a younger population. So for example, my daughter, who is a recent college graduate, came back home. We purchased an LRA home for her for $750. And she's invested under $15,000 to make it her home. And this is a great starter home. That's the price of a vehicle. So a lot of young adults can come back to the city and invest that way and get their starter home and reside in it, help pay their student debt off. But that's one program that we host. But we've also been working with the city in something called the Vacancy Collaborative. Certain things happened in 2015 where SLACO started a vacancy committee. And we hosted various vacancy summits, a legal tools summit, where we recognized that Kansas City was doing something different legislatively with private owners, with neighborhoods, and we wanted that. And we had Peter Hoffman come to our legal tools summit, an attorney with Legal Services of Western Missouri, who is from St. Louis. And he brought back various programs, Adopt a Neighborhood program, so neighborhood residents can deal with private owners that are neglecting their properties. But a lot of things have fallen from SLACO doing that work in 2015. At the same time, we heard that Mayor Slay has launched his vacancy task force. And we were trying to coordinate, but during that time, the mayor announced that he would no longer seek re-election. So we were kind of left at a standstill in a holding pattern. But SLACO still continued its movement with Finest 15 and other programs.
Patrick, from the city's point of view, I mean, you've got a major problem. These things are not on tax rolls. These are costing taxpayers money.
Huge problem.
But yet they started someplace. At some point, some owner, whether it was the descendants of the original owner or some LLC that had purchased the property from out of the city or even out of the state, decided, screw it, I'm walking away from it. At some point, a conscious decision was made by an owner of a property to walk away from it. What recourse does the city have to kind of punish them for that decision, or because it's private property, are they allowed to get away with it and end up costing the city money?
I mean, it's a really complicated issue, just like vacancy in general, but you're absolutely correct. Every property used to have an owner. And we went from a city of 850,000 people in the 1950s and 60s to 315 or 308, whatever your census count is currently. And so that leaves behind a lot of underutilized vacant property as a result. So the city just inherently has very weak legal tools related to our ability to fine and hold property owners accountable for code violations and things like that.
Now, weak because of the way the laws in the city are.
Our charter, we're limited to a $500 fine for most.
And that's in the city charter.
In the city charter, correct. And so if you're left with the decision of fixing your roof and doing tuck pointing on a 120-year-old brick 3-story structure, are you going to take the $500 fine?
So you can walk away from it, you'll get nailed for $500 and that's it. That's all that'll happen.
Exactly.
Is there any way to change that so basically the city could, for want of a better term, get more medieval with these people? I mean, basically make it not worth their while to not fix up their property?
Yeah, so that's part of this collaborative conversation. So, kind of backing up, about over the last 2.5 years has been a really interesting time for the vacancy conversation in St. Louis. You asked before, how could this happen? I think it could happen because people really weren't aware, but for the residents living next to it daily, of the scale and the gravity and how damaging this issue could be long-term.
Because they would never go to that part of town.
And I'm talking about policymakers too. It just wasn't really understood. And it's not just us that have this issue, it's a national issue. So you see lots of cities that along the same timeline as St. Louis kind of getting religion on this problem. Nationally, it was happening in cities all across the U.S. And so, as Sundy mentioned, we've decided to not have a city task force and a neighborhood organization subcommittee. We formed the Vacancy Collaborative with lots of partners, with lots of different expertise and ideas, and we're working on things like legal tools. There's a subcommittee completely focused on legal tools and working with Peter Hoffman and Legal Services of Eastern Missouri now.
Now we brought him here.
We've developed a program with Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, BAMSL, St. Louis, the Bar Association of Metropolitan St. Louis, and the city to hopefully hold property owners more accountable. Peter and Legal Services can help neighborhoods build cases against private problem properties, and they take those cases to circuit court. If the city, through our municipal fees and fines, take a case to court, it goes to municipal court. We're limited drastically with our tools in municipal court. Circuit court, it's a whole different ball game. They can get a little bit more medieval, as you pointed out.
But the city charter would have to be changed in order to do that.
Well, Peter has the ability as a private lawyer to file a private claim with the neighborhood on a property and take it to circuit court. And so that's the program Sundy mentioned Kansas City was doing, so we've established that here. We're maybe a year in at this point. I'm not sure we're quite within a year, but it's been working great. Peter's out meeting with neighbors, and so that's one way that we're thinking about this.
How successful has the ownership initiative been, or any initiative to get these things rehabbed and occupied? Again, I mean, if you've got 25,000 properties, some of them are standing by force of habit, and some of them are actually rehabbable that could work. But how successful has it been so far, and has there been interest in getting these things rehabbed and the capital to do it?
Well, the last report I got from LRA was saying that last month they sold 89 homes, which was a record number for the land.
And these homes would sell for a few $100, if that?
A few thousand, or $750.
Yeah.
A few thousand.
A few thousand, yeah. So they are increasing. And what we're trying to do is to create multiple resources. So purchasing LRA properties and rehabbing them is one way, but we also have Peter Hoffman, who's co-chair of our working group for vacancy prevention, to help existing residents so that they don't just abandon their home, to get the resources to stabilize their home, get a new roof so they don't have to leave their home. And speaking of the municipal court fund, when people get called into municipal court, sometimes they don't have the money to do the repair work. So we're trying to start a fund, which Kansas City has, and we're trying to figure out ways to fund that right now. But Peter Hoffman is trying to create a municipal court fund so those people that come in charged with something that they need to repair, they have a fund that they can utilize to make those repairs. But we're looking at multiple things in addition to just having someone purchase LRA and stabilize it. We want to help existing
How many of these buildings just need to be torn down of 25,000? Does anybody have a guesstimate? Are most of them salvageable?
So let me differentiate that number a little bit. So it's 25,000 citywide, about 13,000 are privately owned, about 9,000 of those privately owned properties are buildings, the other being lots.
Okay.
About 12,000 are owned by the LRA. About 7,000 of those, 8,000 of those are lots. A little over 3,000 of those are buildings. So under the city's control, we have about 3,500, let's just say, buildings that we're managing not well, right? So that's where Prop NS comes in. Our ability to.
And Prop NS.
Prop NS is Proposition Neighborhood Stabilization. It passed in, I don't remember the date. Was it 2017?
I think it was 2017. But explain to people what that is.
It's essentially a property tax that will allow the city to use up to $30,000 on a residential structure for stabilization and repair. And we don't mean, gut rehab. We're talking about putting, gutters on, closing up windows, tuck pointing falling walls. And so with SLACO's help, we're going to figure out how to use that so we can save more of these buildings.
But there's no real hard census number that we've got X number that are salvageable and Y number that are just going to have to be demolished.
That's part of this process.
That's one of the critical pieces. Yeah. That's the number one thing. When Patrick and I started working together to get a plan for spending and allocating the Proposition NS funds was we need an inventory on every single LRA-owned property.
Which we don't have currently.
Which we don't have.
Really?
And we also need to set a standard where as they come into LRA,
we're doing a scan.
We do a scan and we set a rating for.
Do you think there's a market there for these buildings? There
is. I mean, and we've seen it through the history of St. Louis. I mean, we've had neighborhoods that have been hollowed out for, time and time again. Soulard, Central West End have been great examples of this. Lafayette Square, great example of this. Now, there are lots of other circumstances that complicate the real estate market, but we have historic homes, we have historic brick. These properties inherently have worth. The challenge is, finding the resources to stabilize them before they fall into themselves. And so your question previously about how many need to be demolished, a lot of them, unfortunately. And so we've allocated $3.6 million in the last budget, city budget for demolition, which is 3 times more than has ever been allocated in at least the last decade. And as a result of really not taking it seriously over the last decade, many of these buildings have deteriorated to the point that they just have to be taken down.
So, given all this then, glass half full or half empty when it comes to abandoned buildings? You've had the effects of racism and disinvestment, you've had property owners walk away, you've had taxpayers stuck with the tab, you've had neighborhood residents either depressed or absolutely terrified by these things going over decades. Does it look better to you, something that now we're actually paying attention to it?
I think the glass is half full. And what I say to all St. Louisans, especially African Americans in North St. Louis City, is to be woke. And we got to stay woke. And we have got to get ready because change is coming and it's to our benefit. We have to make sure that our voice is heard so that it's to our benefit. I'm going to do everything I can working with various organizations, other groups to bring in resources and monies, but I need my community to stand up and be ready to voice what they'd like to see. It is time for us to create a new vision for St. Louis City.
And for the residents of these neighborhoods to actually be able to buy these things.
To buy these things, existing residents to take part, displaced residents to take part, but it is time for all residents to come together to create a new vision for the city of St. Louis. Gone are the days, what St. Louisans, every St. Louisans, whether you're on North St. Louis or South St. Louis, should understand that this racial segregation and this blighting and redlining in Team 4 has gotten us nowhere. We're not a competitive city on the national market. We're not seen as a #1 city in this nation, but we could be. But we have to put all that aside and come together and work and get rid of the racial inequities and socioeconomic inequities that have existed in these communities for years. And it takes both of us. Our people, black people, we need to be woke. But then white people have to be woke as well to the ramifications that certain systemic problems have had on our community and wake up to it and come together and work together so that we can build something better.
Patrick, you get the final word from the city's point of view. Half full, half empty. The problem's still there. People are becoming aware of it. I mean, is there a demand? Do you see this going someplace?
100% half full. There are too many interested people working on this issue right now, more than ever before. We've got passionate community representation from folks like Sundy. We've got a mayor's administration that is committed itself to doing this work more so than ever in the past. And we have too many tools at our fingertips right now. We're building great partnerships. We're putting together competitive programming that is actually making strides. We're being far more transparent about the work that we're doing, engaging residents almost at every step. And so really the only place from here is up. And I think it's really a great time for cities like St. Louis. And if we can get our hands around this issue, we'll be that much more competitive.
We love ending this program on an optimistic note. Thank both of you for coming in.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Our thanks to Sundy Whiteside and Patrick Brown for being here, and our thanks to you for joining us. We'll see you back here next week for another edition of the Jaco Report. No, I mean, one